Hello everyone, I'm Irena. I'm from the Yao mail mining team. We are, uh, I'm from the mail mining team in Yao, and we are part of the Yao research campus in Haifa, located at Haifa. We focused on innovation and advanced features in Yao mail product. So I will start with a short introduction about the Yao mail product. In contrary of the assumptions that we have in Israel that Yao mail is dead, it's not. We actually have more than 200 million active users across the globe. We also, our systems process billions of messages every day. So our algorithms must be really efficient and also effective. So where do we get those messages from? How we have so many data? Actually, most of the traffic in mail is machine generated. It's generated by script. And it's not spam. Those messages are really important. It's true that we have a lot of promotion information there, but it's also your travel itinerary or purchase receipt from Amazon or from AliExpress receipt confirmation. So we must have really efficient algorithms to retrieve this information. So our role as research scientists and research engineers to develop those algorithms that will assist you, the users, to get quick and easy access to this information. So we'll go over a few advanced smart features in Yao Mail that are based on the technology that was developed by my team. First one is classification. So based on characteristics of a sender, we can differentiate if the sender is a machine or a human. This helps us with a feature of enabling alerts only from messages that were received from people. Another classification algorithm is to classify messages into categories, for example, travel or social. And this helps the user to organize his inbox using the smart views in Yao Mail or the tabs in Gmail. Another task is information extractions. So given a automatically machine-generated message, we have a lot of repeated information, and only a few pieces of information are really important and personal to the user. And given the ability to cluster together machine-generated messages of the same type, we can identify what are those important pieces of information. Then we can, that are personal to the user. Then we can extract this information, and use it for different features that can assist you. For example, so this is the extraction of the data pieces. We also associate it with annotations, like arriving date. And when we extract those data pieces and annotate them, we use it in different features, like travel assistant or delivery notification, and so on. So after you know what are the features that uses our technology and algorithms, let's go deeper and understand how we implement it. So when we deal with machine-generated messages, the first task is to classify, to cluster together messages of the same type, messages that were generated by the same script. They have the same structure. This will help us to mine together to those different algorithms on the cluster. So the first clustering method that my team suggested was header clustering. In this clustering method, we use only the subject. We don't look at the content at all to be as efficient as we can. We define a template of messages by only a sender and the regex on the subject. For example, Amazon.com, messages from Amazon.com, your order of something has shipped, and so on. This method of templating was described in the paper that was published in Wisdom, and you can get more detail there. And this method has some limitation, the header clustering. One limitation is inconsistency. One template of messages can have many types of messages inside it. For example, your order of something can be your order confirmation or the receipt on your order. And we want to cluster together messages of the same type. Another limitation is the different side of it is incompleteness. The same types of messages can have totally different subjects. For example, for multiple languages, you can visually see that those messages has the same structure, but the subjects are different and cannot match the same regex because they are in different languages. This is why we suggested a new way of clustering that is based on the structure and the body of the messages, and we call it X clusters. As I said, it's based on the body. The X cluster is identified by hash signature and is using the DOM tree, the HTML tags of the message. For example, those two messages will be clustered together, and you can see that the structure is similar, but the private information of the user and specific purchase is different. Let's go over an example to see how we generate those clusters. Given this simple HTML of a message, we want to get the signature of the cluster it belongs to. So let's look on the HTML tree. We are looking only on the leaves, on the textual leaves. We will ignore other leaves, and we will scan this tree from the root to the leaf. The concatenation of the HTML tags from the root to the leaf, we call it XPath. Its list of XPaths actually defines the structure of the message, the ordered list. Then we concatenate all the XPaths, and we apply some hash function to receive this signature. So this algorithm is very efficient. It scans the message only once, and without seeing any other messages, it can give you the identifier of the cluster that this message belongs to. Now, let's go to the second task of mail classification. We will use now our ability to cluster together messages with the same structure. And in this task, we want to give a category to each cluster, whether those messages in the cluster are travel or purchase. In high level, our framework of learning is given a cluster of messages. We generate the features, we extract features and aggregate them across the cluster. We also have label data from humans that looked on a few samples in each X cluster and gave the correct label. Of course, those messages that are masked, anonymized, or we receive the permission of the user. Then we apply the learning process and receive classification for new clusters. Let's go into details. What are the features we use? We have several types of features. The first type is content features. We actually just take all the content, all the words we have in the message and just count how many times we saw each word. Here the most important feature we saw was actually the money symbols, the airport names that help to identify the category. Another type of features are user actions. For example, we saw that moving to folder, and we also took the name of the folder, was very significant feature that helped with the classification. It's true that this action is relatively rare. Very little, very small amount of users move to folder. But we have a cluster of sometimes hundreds of thousands messages. So it's enough that only a few move to folder, and we have this information for all the cluster as a feature. Also, another type of features is traffic. We saw the distribution, for example, of the when we received the messages. Because for marketing messages, you can see that most of the cluster is sent through 1 hour or 2 hours, like a boost of messages. And for purchase messages, for purchase confirmation, it goes across all the day and not specific hour of all the messages in the cluster. The first type is address. We took the sender who sent this message and identified information like parts of the sender are actual words that keywords that can help us to understand what is a category. For example, here you can see ticket reservation is part of the sender. The last type is the structure. For example, one of the features is the depth of the XPath. You can imagine that when human writes a message, you don't have all the tables with the images and long passes in the DOM tree. And for machine generated, you will receive much longer XPaths. So we understood the features. Now let's go over the learning process. We trained a model per category when we trained one versus all. A logistic regression algorithm was the one we used, and we predicted based on the highest score received. The category with the highest score was the one that we used. We used training of 6,500 X clusters when 20% were random samples, but we also used 80% of equally distributed among all categories because we wanted to be able to learn also categories with a small amount of X clusters. And the test was 1,000 X clusters with also equally distributed messages across categories. It's important to note that we wanted to make sure that our categories make sense, because each week for the X cluster we receive new messages. And then we checked week after week whether the same X cluster hash signature receives the same category. Even though the messages changed, the features still capture the behavior of the cluster. And as we assumed, the category remained stable. For example, if specific X cluster was categorized as travel, it remained travel through all the weeks we checked. And let's go to the results. You can see that we received the impressive precision recall results for almost all the categories. We received close to 90%. And in some of them even higher. This work, you can get more details about the results and more analysis that we did in the papers that we published in CAKM. The classification is actually one of the use cases we described when we describe the structural clustering of machine-generated messages. So now let's go to the final task of mail extraction. Here we will use both the fact that we know how to cluster together messages with the same structure, and we also know which category this cluster belongs to, whether this cluster of messages is travel or it is a purchase confirmation. Because I want to know what are the labels or the annotations, contextual annotations I will use. For travel, I will use date depart, and for purchase cluster, I will use date order or shipment. So this is the infrastructure we use in YAO. You can see here the parts that I described before, the classification and the clustering. we have an offline pipeline that generates automatically extraction rules. This is a part we will discuss in the light blue. And each automatic extraction rule stored in the rule management framework. In the online, so it is done based on a few samples from the cluster. Let's say 100 or 50 samples of the cluster is enough for us to generate the automatic rules. And then in the online, the purple pipeline, we receive a new message from the X clusters that we already generated the automatic rule, and we apply it and store the extraction output. How we do it? So we have a cluster of messages from specific X cluster, and we store it inside the data structure. We call it extraction table. In extraction table, each row is a content of specific message from the sample, and each column is the XPath. Why we have exactly the same columns, the same XPaths in all those messages? Because we sampled them from the same X cluster. X cluster defines the structure and what which XPaths we have. So we will differentiate between constant XPaths with exactly the same value and the variable XPaths 1 and 2, where you can see that they are not exactly the same between all the messages in the sample. We are interested in extracting this different part that is personal to the user and generate the extraction rules only for variable XPaths. Of course, we will use the constant XPaths as to help us annotate correctly the information. Let's go to the rule creation phase. We have two parts. First, we create a basic rule, and then we refine it. The rule is in the regex format. In the basic rule creation phase, we have two steps. First, we clean the part that is repeated for all the messages in the sample between different messages. In this example, we remove the departing at part, and we are left with 9 a.m. And we apply light annotation, associate it with the light annotation. For this example, the light annotation is time. In the second phase, when we look not only on specific XPath, but we now look on the context, we check all the message, we will switch the light annotation with contextual one, and we'll change the time depart to the time to departing time as a new contextual annotation. The light annotation we used were from two types. One, dictionaries, and the second, format patterns. For dictionaries, for example, name, airport code, and so on. And for format patterns, it's dates and times. The strength of this method is that we don't need to create a dictionary of all the names in the world. It's not possible. But it's enough that only 70% of the names in our samples will appear in a dictionary, or I don't know, we check different predefined percentage that's required. And then even if Ira and Dotan, names that we don't have in our dictionary, it's enough for us that we have more than 70% of the names, or 60% in the dictionary. And then we can annotate the second word as a name. So let's go over an example. This is an example of basic rule. You can see it's a regex, where the parts that we want to clean are actually appearing in the regex. I didn't say that this is an example of a few values of specific XPath, the top 5 from specific X cluster in united.com domain. This is just an example. Each wildcard in this regex is associated with a light annotation. For example, the second one is place, and the third one is airport code. When we created the basic rule, now we want to refine it and create the advanced, the refined rule. The refined rule created using the models we trained per each light annotation. The features that were used in our models, there are a lot of features. Some of them, for example, relative XPath position, because for the date booking, it is usually appear on the top when the date arrival or departure in the middle of the message, or we also use the headers of the HTML and attributes, because in travel, this is an example of this that we are talking about. You have a lot of information in the header of the table, like arrival city or arrives to. Those keywords help the classifier to identify to which contextual annotation we need to change the light annotation. As I said, we trained a classifier per each light annotation to switch to contextual annotations. For example, but of course, for each category of messages, we have different contextual annotations. So for travel, we train the date to be replaced by date arrival and date travel. And for the purchase class, we trained from date to date booking and date purchase. So this is an example of text from message for specific XPath, and this is the extraction rule with the associated contextual annotations. We switch the light annotation to contextual ones, and this is the output we received. For example, TP46 is a flight number, and so on. So let's go to the evaluation. We evaluated our framework for a large scale of messages. We used 10 million of messages across a few 36,000 X clusters that covered 100 domains. I want to highlight that the domains we used for training are not the same. We evaluated also on many new domains that we didn't saw for training in order to make sure that those rules that we generate are also correct for the new domains. And as you can see, our precision is 90% and more, because extraction is a precision-based, precision-focused application, because many times it's user-facing features. And the recall we received is also very high. We saw that, for example, for place, increasing the dictionary volume will increase our recall. This general framework for generating automatic extraction rules described in the paper we published in www. You can see there much more analysis and more details about the models we trained. For those of you who do not like to read academic papers, you can also read find articles in the web that describe all the smart features in Meow-Mail that are based on our work, and you can read about our group in general. Questions?